Hello, and thank you for joining us to learn about Bellingham's first urban forestry management plan. I'm Amelia Niederbar. I'm an urban forestry consultant with Diamond Head Consulting, and we're working with the City of Bellingham to develop the plan. The City of Bellingham is leading the project with support from both us and Dumas and Associates who are supporting us with engagement. In this presentation today, I'm going to be providing an overview of what the urban forest is and then sharing some of what we've learned about Bellingham's trees and forests so far. We're also currently seeking input from the community to help inform the vision, goals, and objectives in the plan. So at the end of the presentation, I'm going to share several ways that we hope you'll get involved to share your views and your ideas. Before I get into the details of what the project has found, I want to cover some of the basic common terminology we use in urban forest management. Beginning with, what is an urban forest? Well, it's all the trees in Bellingham. The urban forest consists of a large network of forests and trees that occur across public and private land. So that includes the street trees in front of your home, the park trees, the forested open spaces, trees on institutional campuses, and in many private ownership settings ranging from parking lots to backyards. Bellingham's urban forest is found on Coast Salish land and waters that have been cared for by the peoples of the Lumi Nation and the Nooksack tribe since before remembered time. This project collected data about the urban forest within what is today known as the City of Bellingham, as well as in the urban growth areas just beyond the boundary. The urban forest in Bellingham today consists of a mosaic of both native and introduced trees, and that mosaic is driven largely by patterns of land use in recent history. So why is the city developing an urban forestry management plan? Well, Bellingham isn't alone. With more than 80% of Americans living in cities and in urban areas, the benefits of having trees and nature in cities are more important than ever. And many different cities across the United States and around the world are developing plans to manage their urban forests. Trees provide numerous benefits. They clean our air and water, they reduce runoff, they provide habitat for animals and pollinators, and connect people with nature. And research has actually shown that trees in cities improve people's physical and mental health and well-being significantly. One study even found that walking in the forest boosts the cells in our immune system that fight viruses and cancer, and only after 20 minutes. Spending time in forests is even now being prescribed by doctors in some places to support people's health and wellness. Urban forests are also really critical in helping cities to address climate change. On hot summer days, trees cool our streets and buildings, and they lower the energy costs and carbon emissions associated with that energy use. Some of the benefits of Bellingham's trees were calculated using a program called Canopy. The program estimated that Bellingham's urban forest provides approximately $42 million in stored carbon benefits and annual benefits of approximately $6 million per year in air pollution removed, runoff avoided, and carbon sequestered. And that's just a fraction of the benefits that trees provide, so only a few that we can actually measure. There are many additional and tangible benefits that aren't captured by this valuation. Trees and forests in Bellingham make Bellingham a special place, and the community has long valued the urban forest and is already a proud Tree City USA community. The city's comprehensive plan highlights urban forestry management plan as an important tool for maintaining a healthy and desirable urban forest. And Bellingham's climate action plan also identifies forest as a key component of the city's natural systems that are going to help mitigate and adapt to climate change. So now I'm going to cover some of the work that's been completed in phase 1. This urban forestry management plan is going to help city staff and interested parties to maintain a healthy and desirable urban forest through a well-coordinated, consistent, efficient, and sustainable long-term urban forest management plan. So to develop this plan, we're going through a 3-stage process. We're currently in phase 2, and I'm going to cover a little bit of what has happened in phase 1. So in phase 1, we assessed the canopy and forest structure within the city and in that urban growth area. And we also undertook an analysis of wildlife connectivity within forested patches in the city and beyond, as well as an analysis of some of the wildland fuels and interface areas to help inform future wildfire planning. And that information is all summarized in the State of the Urban Forestry Report that's available on the city's website now. That State of the Urban Forest Report contains information about key metrics that we're going to use as the baseline from which we can measure future change in Bellingham's urban forest. One of those key metrics is canopy cover. It's a metric used really broadly in urban forestry as a means of describing the quantity and extent of the urban forest within a city area. If you imagine yourself as a bird looking down, it's the area occupied by the tree crown when you're looking down from above. And while it doesn't describe everything about a forest, it's a really helpful metric because it's an easy one to compare and measure in terms of change through time, in terms of different canopy in different areas and land uses, and even between cities. We measured Bellingham's canopy cover using the LiDAR data that was available for both 2013 and 2018. That information also provides a really detailed three-dimensional map of the surface, and so we can use it to estimate the height of the trees as well as their locations. This study found that for 2018, canopy cover within the city is estimated at 40%. And when we include the urban growth area as well, that estimate increases to 42%. Canopy cover isn't evenly distributed across the entire city. There's some low canopy neighborhoods and some high canopy neighborhoods and some average canopy neighborhoods. The lowest neighborhoods noted were City Center, Sunnyland, and Ledyard Streets. And then the very high canopy cover neighborhoods include Edgemoor, South Samish, Whatcom, and Western Washington University. We also wanted to understand the distribution of native forest stands throughout the community and to understand a bit more about their structure as well. And so we were able to use the LiDAR to obtain some of this information. That LiDAR analysis enabled us to look at, as I mentioned, at heights, but also we could classify trees according to deciduous or coniferous types. And that gave us a bit more information about these forest stands. And then with some ground truthing, we were also able to classify these forest structure classes further. So you'll see in this map on the right, forests are classified according to these broad categories of structural stage. And what we found was that in the north, forests were typically young and more deciduous in character. And then in the south, forests were typically mature coniferous stands with older trees and taller trees. And in fact, the LiDAR picked up the tallest tree in Bellingham as being an impressive 251 feet, which is taller than Bellingham Towers, so taller than any other building in the city. As you will have noted earlier, Bellingham's tree canopy isn't evenly distributed across the city of Bellingham. We wanted to explore that further from an equity perspective, and so we used American Forest Tree Equity Score methodology. Now that score is used to indicate whether there are enough trees in a neighborhood for everyone to experience the health and economic and climate benefits that trees provide. The scores are based on tree canopy, surface temperature, income, employment, race, age, and health factors. And so the higher the score, the better off an area is in relation to it being lower vulnerability. So essentially, the lower the tree equity score, the greater the priority for increasing tree canopy cover in that area. Bellingham's overall tree equity score is 89, which is really great and higher than similar sized municipalities. However, there are neighborhoods in central Bellingham that have tree equity scores lower than average, and in fact lower than a value of 75, which the American forests have established as a baseline for tree equity. We also sought to understand how the forest was performing in relation to fish and wildlife habitat. So part of that was simply looking at how much canopy cover there was within riparian areas and watersheds. Riparian zones in each watershed exceeded 40% canopy cover, but as you'd imagine, there is differential in cover between the more urban and more rural parts of those watersheds and zones. We also sought to understand how well-connected forest areas were from the perspective of wildlife habitat. And so this map on the right indicates where there are some important wildlife corridors and significant wildlife habitat areas from existing forest, and then also some significant barriers to movement, which are really focused on the I-5. You may have picked up earlier that we looked at canopy cover values ranging back as far as 2006 to 2018. And what we found was that canopy cover has been relatively stable citywide between those two time periods. However, as you can see on this map, there's areas within the city that have both gained canopy and lost tree canopy, and that's resulted in balance overall. But just to note that there has been change, it's just that there has been gain, which is fantastic, and there's also been loss. Some of the reasons for that gain have been new trees that have been planted in development areas, or the growth of existing trees, also natural regeneration and people just planting trees on their properties. There's also been canopy loss, and that can happen for a variety of reasons. So the more obvious reasons include land clearing for development, sometimes for timber harvesting. There's also age-related decline and natural disturbance, and then climate change, where we're seeing drought-induced mortality becoming a more common occurrence throughout the Pacific Northwest. So to summarize the key findings from phase 1, we found that the city's central and northern neighbourhoods tend to have lower canopy cover and younger forests, whereas the city's southern neighbourhoods have higher canopy cover and older forests. Canopy cover has been relatively stable throughout the city between 2006 and 2018. And most native forests, like the greatest area of native forest within the city is young. However, many of those stands are just on the cusp of transitioning between young and mature stages. So they're developing a greater structural complexity. As well, Bellingham's tree canopy is performing relatively well from an equity perspective overall compared to similar municipalities, but there are several areas, particularly in central Bellingham, that have a tree equity score that is lower than we would like to see. And as well, from the connectivity perspective, just noting that significant barrier to wildlife movement associated with the Interstate 5. In terms of the project's next steps as we move into phase 2, we now have the first round of community engagement beginning, and that's going to inform the development of the vision goals and targets of the strategy. And once that phase of engagement is complete, we're going to begin work on drafting the actual plan later this year. And after that draft is ready, there'll be a second round of community engagement, and that'll be focused on asking for community feedback on the plan and to help prioritize the actions for implementation. And then hopefully the urban forestry management plan will shift to approval in late next year. So in summary, Bellingham's urban forestry management plan is going to provide the baseline information about the current state of the urban forest that was developed in phase 1 of this work. That baseline can be remeasured in the future to understand if the plan is working. The plan is also going to include the long-term vision for the urban forest, informed by shared community values and goals. And those are being developed as part of phase 2 of this work and the engagement that's currently occurring. And the plan is also going to include short, medium, and long-term strategies and actions to reach the community vision. And those are going to be drafted in phase 3 of this work, occurring later this year. So there's several ways we're hoping you'll get involved in addition to attending the open houses. Engage Bellingham is active, and it has several tools where you can provide your input. One of those is a survey, which would take approximately 15 to 20 minutes to complete. The questions in that survey are seeking to inform the vision that we'll develop, as well as those goals, strategies, and priority actions. And that survey is open until June 15th. As well, we're hoping you'll share your stories with us, stories about trees and forests in Bellingham and why they're important to you. In addition, there's a mapping tool where you can add places specifically located in your favorite urban forest places that you value and explain why you value them, as well as places where you think improvements needed, whether that be through planting, maintenance, or some other aspect of improvement for urban forest management. In terms of additional events, there are also several focus sessions planned, and you can contact the city to register for any of these sessions if you identify with any of these topics. And if you'd like to explore more of the data that was presented in this presentation, you can visit the story map at that URL below. The story map includes the information collected through phase 1 in the State of the Urban Forest report and allows you to view data, graphics, and maps in a more interactive way. Also embedded in that story map and available on the website is a video about the urban forest, also summarizing that State of the Urban Forest report. So thanks for tuning in today, and please do take up some of those opportunities to get involved.